Starlight encounters. The repair bay of Celestial Station hummed with the familiar symphony of tools against metal, a sound that had become Tessa Williams' constant companion over her 3 years as chief systems engineer. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and streaks of mechanical grease marked her jumpsuit like badges of honor. The massive panoramic window beside her workspace revealed the breathtaking vista of swirling nebulae and distant stars, a view most would stop to admire, but one that had become Tessa's everyday backdrop. "Jasper, hand me the pulse calibrator," she called out, extending her hand without looking up from the complex array of circuitry she was repairing. Her robotic assistant whirred to life, its single optical sensor glowing blue as it selected the correct tool from her workbench. "Chief Williams, may I remind you that your shift ended 2 hours ago?" Jasper's synthesized voice carried the hint of concern that had been programmed into it. Tessa smirked, taking the tool. "Thanks for the reminder, but this stabilizer won't fix itself." "Your dedication to station maintenance continues to exceed protocol requirements by approximately 43%, Jasper observed. "Someone's got to keep this place from falling apart," Tessa replied, making the final adjustments to the temperamental circuit board. Celestial Station was humanity's pride, a massive hub at the crossroads of 3 major interstellar trade routes. But after 15 years in service, it was showing its age. A sudden commotion outside the repair bay drew her attention. Station security personnel hurried past her door, their normally casual demeanor replaced with rigid professionalism. Curious, Tessa set down her tools and stepped into the corridor. "What's going on?" she asked a passing security officer she recognized. "Diplomatic arrival," Officer Benson replied quickly. "Aurelian royal delegation, very high profile." Tessa nodded, immediately understanding the fuss. The Aurelians were among the most powerful alien civilizations in this sector of the galaxy, tall, striking beings with iridescent skin that seemed to capture and reflect starlight itself. Their technological advancements were legendary, their culture ancient and sophisticated, and they rarely visited human stations. She was about to return to her work when the security detail rounded the corner, followed by a procession that made her freeze in place. 4 Aurelian royal guards led the way, their crystalline armor catching the station's light and fracturing it into rainbow patterns across the walls. Behind them walked the most striking being Tessa had ever seen. He stood at least 7 feet tall, his form both powerful and elegant. His skin shimmered with a pearlescent blue glow that seemed to pulse gently with each heartbeat. Unlike the guards, whose features were stern and militaristic, his face possessed a refined beauty, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that gleamed like twin sapphires. A subtle crown of bioluminescent material sat upon his head, marking him as royalty. As the procession approached, Tessa pressed herself against the wall, eyes downcast as protocol dictated. The royal party was nearly past when a sudden mechanical screech pierced the air, followed by a shower of sparks from an overhead conduit. Tessa reacted instinctively. Her hand flew to her tool belt, extracting a magnetic stabilizer. Before the security team could even react, she leaped forward, slapping the device onto the failing conduit and typing a rapid sequence into its control pad. The sparking ceased immediately. The corridor fell silent. Tessa suddenly realized she was standing directly in the path of the royal procession, her action having brought the entire delegation to a halt. Worse, she had moved without clearance, a potential security violation. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly stepping back. "Power surge in the tertiary conduit. Happens sometimes in this section. It's stable now." She expected to be escorted away by security, but instead, the Aurelian royal stepped forward, his sapphire eyes studying her with open curiosity. "You prevented a disruption to our meeting," he said, his voice like silk over stone, the universal translator barely needed for his perfect English. "Most impressive reaction time." Tessa swallowed hard. "Just doing my job, Your Highness." "And what is your job exactly?" he asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Chief Systems Engineer Tessa Williams," she replied, fighting the urge to fidget under his intense gaze. "I keep the station running." A small smile curved his lips. "A vital role indeed. I am Prince Chiron of the 7th House of Aurelia." One of his advisors stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with this unplanned interaction. "Your Highness, the diplomatic corps is waiting." Prince Chiron nodded but lingered a moment longer. Perhaps you could show me more of this station's system sometime, Engineer Williams. I find human ingenuity fascinating. Before Tessa could formulate a response, the procession continued, leaving her standing in the corridor with her heart racing inexplicably fast. That was unexpected, Jasper commented, having rolled out from the repair bay to witness the exchange. Extremely, Tessa agreed, struggling to process what had just happened. The next morning, Tessa had almost convinced herself that the encounter had been nothing more than a polite acknowledgement, quickly forgotten by the prince. She focused on her work, troubleshooting a particularly troublesome hydraulic system in the agricultural section. Chief Williams, the voice of Station Director Patel came through her communicator. Report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Tessa frowned. I'm in the middle of a critical repair, Director. It can wait, this cannot. Minutes later, Tessa found herself standing outside the station's most prestigious conference room, still in her work jumpsuit, smudges of lubricant on her hands. She'd barely had time to splash water on her face. The doors slid open to reveal Director Patel, and to her shock, Prince Chiron. The Aurelian Royal was examining a holographic display of the station's infrastructure, his long fingers manipulating the image with surprising familiarity. Engineer Williams, Director Patel said, a strange mix of tension and excitement in his voice. Prince Chiron has specifically requested your expertise for a special project. The prince turned, that same curious smile playing on his lips. Your director informs me you are the most knowledgeable person regarding this station's systems. Tessa straightened, professional pride overriding her surprise. I'd say that's accurate, yes. Excellent, Prince Chiron nodded. I wish to understand how you've modified standard human technology to accommodate multiple alien physiologies. It's quite remarkable, especially given your limited resources. Director Patel laughed nervously. Your Highness flatters us. Our technology is, of course, primitive compared to Aurelian achievements. Different, not primitive, Prince Chiron corrected, his eyes never leaving Tessa. Innovation often blooms most impressively under constraints. Engineer Williams clearly understands this principle. For the next hour, Tessa found herself explaining the station's hybrid systems to Prince Chiron. To her surprise, he asked insightful questions that revealed a deep technical knowledge. He didn't speak to her with condescension, but with genuine interest, occasionally offering observations that suggested solutions to problems she'd been wrestling with for months. As their meeting concluded, Prince Chiron turned to Director Patel. I would like Engineer Williams to show me the station's reactor core tomorrow. Her explanations have been most illuminating. Director Patel nodded enthusiastically. Of course, Your Highness, I'll arrange a formal tour with our highest-ranking officials and... Just Engineer Williams, Prince Chiron interrupted gently but firmly. I prefer practical knowledge to diplomatic posturing. After the prince departed, Director Patel turned to Tessa, his expression bewildered. What did you do to impress him so much? Tessa shook her head, fixed a conduit apparently. Later that evening, as Tessa was finishing her shift, a station courier delivered a small package to her quarters. Inside, she found an exquisite miniature tool crafted from an unknown material that seemed to shimmer like Prince Chiron's skin. A note accompanied it. For emergencies and sparking conduits, until tomorrow, K. Tessa examined the gift, turning it over in her fingers. This was uncharted territory. Aurelian royalty didn't give personal gifts to human engineers. They didn't request private tour or engage in casual conversation. Jasper, she said to her robotic assistant as it charged in the corner, I think I might be in trouble. My analysis suggests interesting situation would be more accurate than trouble, Jasper replied. Tessa smiled despite herself. Interesting is one word for it. She didn't know it yet, but Prince Chiron had turned down 17 marriage proposals from the most elite families in 3-star systems. He had rejected suitors of extraordinary beauty, wealth, and power. And now, for reasons she couldn't begin to comprehend, his attention had fixed upon a human engineer with grease-stained hands and a practical mind. The stars outside her window seemed to pulse a little brighter that night, as if they too were curious to see what would happen next. Cosmic courtship. The reactor core of Celestial Station glowed with an ethereal blue light, casting dramatic shadows across Tessa's face as she guided Prince Chiron through the humming heart of the station. Unlike the pristine halls of the diplomatic section, this was her domain, practical, functional, and impressive in its ingenious complexity rather than its aesthetics. This modified fusion chamber allows us to operate at 87% efficiency, Tessa explained, gesturing to the pulsing core. We salvaged components from decommissioned Centaurian freighters and integrated them with our Earth-standard systems. Prince Chiron moved closer to the observation window, his iridescent skin reflecting the core's blue glow. Remarkable improvisation. Most civilizations would consider these components incompatible. Necessity is a powerful motivator, Tessa shrugged. When replacement parts cost a year's budget to ship from Earth, you learn to get creative. The prince turned to her, those sapphire eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. That creativity is precisely what fascinates me about humans. Your species accomplishes so much with so little. Over the past 3 days, their tour had become a routine that the station crew now observed with barely concealed curiosity. The chief engineer and the alien prince, an unlikely pair moving through service corridors and maintenance tubes, engaged in discussions that ranged from technical engineering to philosophical debates about the nature of innovation. Your Highness, Tessa began, hesitating slightly. Chiron, he corrected gently. When we're not in formal settings, I would prefer you use my name. Tessa nodded, surprised. Chiron, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you really spending so much time on these tours? Surely the Aurelian delegation has more important diplomatic matters to attend to than examining our outdated technology. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Is it so difficult to believe I find this genuinely interesting? Frankly, yes, Tessa replied with characteristic directness. You come from a civilization that achieved interstellar travel while we were still figuring out basic electricity. Our technology must seem like children's toys to you. Chiron's expression grew more serious. Technology is not merely about advancement, Tessa. It's about adaptation and purpose. He gestured around them. This station was built to accommodate dozens of different species, each with their own biological needs, using limited resources at the edge of human territory. That requires a kind of ingenuity my people have long since forgotten. Before Tessa could respond, her communicator chirped urgently. Chief Williams, we have a situation in Docking Bay 7, came the anxious voice of her assistant engineer. Pressure fluctuations in the atmospheric containment field. I'll be right there, she responded, already moving toward the exit. She turned to Chiron. I'm sorry, but I need to handle this. To her surprise, he fell into step beside her. I'll accompany you if you don't mind. I'd like to observe how you handle emergency situations. They moved quickly through the station corridors, Tessa's mind already racing through possible causes and solutions. As they approached the docking bay, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. A tall, imposing Aurelian flanked by 2 guards, his skin shimmering with a deep purple hue that seemed to radiate cold authority. Prince Chiron, the Aurelian spoke, his tone formal but with an undercurrent of disapproval. The High Council has been attempting to reach you for over an hour. Chiron straightened, his demeanor shifting subtly. Lord Zendral, I was not aware you had arrived on the station. Evidently, Lord Zendral replied, his gaze sliding dismissively over Tessa before returning to Chiron. Your father sent me to ensure the trade negotiations proceed as planned. He was concerned about reports of your activities here. Tessa felt an immediate tension emanate from both aliens. There was clearly history between them, and none of it pleasant. Engineer Williams, Chiron said formally, may I present Lord Zendral of the 3rd House of Aurelia, my father's most trusted advisor. Tessa nodded respectfully, but her communicator chirped again. The containment field issue. Go, Chiron said. We can continue our discussion later. As Tessa hurried toward the docking bay, she heard Lord Zendral's voice fade behind her. Discussion. Is that what you call this unusual fascination with primitive technology? The containment field issue was resolved within the hour, a relatively simple programming conflict between the station's original Earth protocols and a newly installed Procyon upgrade. By the time Tessa had fixed the problem and filed her report, the day's shift was ending, and there had been no further communication from Prince Chiron. She returned to her quarters, strangely disappointed. Their daily tour had become something she looked forward to, though she was reluctant to examine exactly why that might be. "You have received an invitation," Jasper announced as she entered her living space. "From whom?" "Prince Chiron of the 7th House of Oralia requests your presence at the diplomatic reception this evening at 2000 hours. Tessa stared at the formal invitation displayed on her personal console. "A diplomatic reception? That's not exactly my scene, Jasper." "The invitation specifies that your attendance is particularly requested by the prince himself," Jasper added. Tessa ran a hand through her hair, suddenly aware of the engine grease under her nails and the permanent scent of machine oil that seemed to cling to her regardless of how much she scrubbed. "I don't even own anything appropriate for a diplomatic function." As if on cue, her door chimed. Outside stood a station courier holding a large package. "Delivery for Chief Engineer Williams." Inside the package, Tessa found an exquisite dress made of a material she'd never seen before, a fabric that seemed to capture and reflect light like the surface of a calm ocean, shifting between deep blue and emerald green with every movement. A note accompanied it, something worthy of the station's heart. K. 2 hours later, Tessa entered the grand reception hall, feeling distinctly out of place despite the dress that fit her perfectly. The room was filled with diplomats from a dozen worlds, station officials in their formal uniforms, and at the center of it all, the Aurelian delegation, glittering like living constellations. Prince Chiron spotted her immediately, excusing himself from a conversation to approach her. "You came," he said, something like relief in his voice. "The chief engineer follows orders," Tessa replied with a small smile, "even when they involve fancy parties instead of reactor maintenance." "Hardly an order," Chiron countered, "more a hopeful request." He offered his arm in a surprisingly human gesture. "Would you allow me to introduce you to some people who might appreciate your insights?" As they moved through the crowd, Tessa became aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She also couldn't help noticing Lord Zendril watching from across the room, his cold gaze never wavering. "Your friend doesn't seem pleased to see me here," she murmured. Chiron followed her gaze. "Zendril is not my friend. He is my rival in many ways, though he believes his position with my father makes him untouchable." He guided her toward a quieter corner of the reception hall. "He represents a faction of our society that believes Oralia should maintain its isolation and superiority. They see interaction with other species as beneath us." "And what do you believe?" Tessa asked. "I believe isolation leads to stagnation," Chiron replied simply. "My people have advanced so far that we've forgotten how to adapt, how to see problems in new ways." His eyes met hers. "Until I met you, I'd begun to fear that the spark of true innovation had died in our civilization." Before Tessa could process the implications of his words, Lord Zendril approached, accompanied by a stunningly beautiful Aurelian female whose skin shimmered with golden light. "Prince Chiron," Zendril said smoothly, "Lady Alindra has traveled quite far to attend this reception. She was most disappointed when you missed the formal introductions." Lady Alindra extended a graceful hand, her golden skin almost blinding in its brilliance. "The disappointment was mine alone, Your Highness. I've so looked forward to meeting you." Tessa didn't need alien cultural knowledge to recognize a carefully orchestrated matchmaking attempt. Lady Alindra was clearly from an important family, and judging by Chiron's subtle stiffening beside her, this wasn't the first such introduction he'd endured. "Lady Alindra," Chiron acknowledged politely, "allow me to present Chief Engineer Tessa Williams, the brilliant mind responsible for many of this station's most innovative systems." Lady Alindra barely glanced at Tessa. "How? Quaint. I understand humans have a remarkable ability to work with limited resources." "We make do," Tessa replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. "Indeed they do," Lord Zendril interjected. "Though perhaps, Engineer Williams, you might excuse us for a moment. There are matters of state that require the prince's attention." Tessa recognized the dismissal for what it was. "Of course, I should check on the environmental systems anyway." She turned to leave, but Chiron's hand gently caught her wrist. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that hadn't been present in their previous interactions, "Engineer Williams has been explaining a fascinating adaptation to the station's communication array. I'm afraid state matters will have to wait, Lord Zendril." The tension in the air was palpable. For a moment, Tessa thought Zendril might actually challenge the prince openly, but instead he bowed stiffly. As you wish, Your Highness. Lady Alindra, perhaps you would enjoy viewing the Earth Art exhibit. As they moved away, Tessa turned to Chiron. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he replied, still watching Zendrel's retreating form. There are forces at work here beyond diplomatic pleasantries, Tessa. My presence on this station and my interest in you has not gone unnoticed by those who would prefer I follow a more traditional path. Interest in me? Tessa repeated, her heart suddenly racing. Chiron's attention returned to her, his sapphire eyes intense. Surely you've realized by now that my fascination extends beyond station engineering. Before she could respond, the lights in the reception hall flickered dramatically, then dimmed to emergency levels. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd as Tessa's communicator chirped urgently. Chief Williams, came the panicked voice of her assistant. We have a catastrophic failure in the main power grid. Environmental systems are switching to backup, but we're losing critical functions across the station. I'm on my way, she replied, already moving toward the exit. She glanced back at Chiron. Duty calls. I'm coming with you, he said without hesitation. As they hurried through the darkened corridors, Tessa couldn't shake the feeling that the timing of this power failure was suspiciously convenient, almost as if someone had deliberately interrupted a conversation that certain parties didn't want to continue. The station's main control room was chaos when Tessa and Chiron arrived. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as technicians scrambled between workstations, their faces illuminated by the harsh light of emergency displays. Status report, Tessa demanded, sliding into her position at the central console. Primary and secondary power grids are down, her assistant, Juno, reported. Environmental systems are running on emergency backup, but we've got maybe 6 hours before life support becomes critical in the residential sectors. Tessa's fingers flew across the control panel, diagnostic screens flashing with warning indicators. This isn't a random failure, she muttered. These systems don't fail simultaneously without cause. Chiron moved to stand beside her, studying the readouts with a frown. May I? He asked, gesturing to a nearby terminal. Tessa nodded, too focused on the crisis to question his involvement. The prince's fingers moved across the alien interface with surprising familiarity, his bioluminescent skin providing additional light in the darkened room. There, he said after a moment, your system was subjected to a targeted electromagnetic pulse, subtle but distinctive. Tessa looked up sharply. Sabotage. I believe so, Chiron confirmed, his expression grim. And given the precision of the attack, it was done by someone with considerable knowledge of both your systems and advanced disruptive technology. Their eyes met in shared understanding. Lord Zendrel had made his move. I need to get to the auxiliary control junction, Tessa said, already moving toward the door. If I can reroute power manually, we can bypass the damaged relays. The journey to the auxiliary control junction meant traversing the rarely used maintenance tunnels that ran through the station's outer hull. As they made their way through the narrow passages, Tessa couldn't help questioning Chiron. Why would Zendrel do this? She asked, her breath visible in the rapidly cooling air. Sabotaging a station filled with diplomatic delegates seems extreme, even for political rivalry. Chiron ducked beneath a low-hanging conduit. It's not about politics, not entirely. It's about me, and by extension, you. Me, Tessa paused, turning to face him in the narrow passage. I'm just a station engineer. No, Chiron said softly. You're much more than that, which is precisely why Zendrel sees you as a threat. In the dim emergency lighting, his skin glowed with a subtle blue pulse that matched the intensity in his eyes. My time here was supposed to be brief, a diplomatic courtesy before returning to Oralia to announce my choice of consort. Consort, Tessa repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. What your people might call a spouse, Chiron clarified. I've rejected every candidate my father has presented over the past 3 cycles. Families like Zendrel's have been positioning their daughters and sons for political alliance through marriage to the 7th house for generations. Understanding dawned on Tessa, and now they think you're interested in a human instead. I am interested in a human, Chiron stated simply, which is why Zendrel is willing to risk an interstellar incident to prevent what he sees as a catastrophic break from tradition. Before Tessa could process the implications of his confession, a violent shudder ran through the station. Warning klaxons blared, and the emergency lights flickered ominously. "We need to move," she said, pushing personal revelations aside. "The station's stabilizers are failing." They reached the auxiliary junction to find it in worse condition than Tessa had feared. The control panels were physically damaged, with clear signs of deliberate sabotage. "This wasn't an electromagnetic pulse," she said, examining the melted circuitry. "Someone was here." Chiron knelt beside her. "Can it be repaired?" Tessa assessed the damage, her mind racing through possible solutions. "Not conventionally, but—" She reached for her tool belt, pulling out the strange Aurelian device Chiron had gifted her. "What exactly does this do?" "It's a molecular restructuring tool," he explained. "It can temporarily realign damaged pathways in most conductive materials." "That might work," Tessa said, already applying the tool to the melted circuits. To her amazement, the damaged components began to glow and reform under its influence. As she worked, Chiron maintained contact with his delegation through a communication device embedded in his ceremonial wristband. "My security team reports that Lord Zendril is missing from the diplomatic quarters," he informed her, "and an unauthorized shuttle departed from the emergency bay 10 minutes ago." "Coward," Tessa muttered, focused on her repairs. "He causes a disaster and then flees." "It's consistent with his character," Chiron agreed grimly. "He seeks advantage without risk." With the alien tool's help, Tessa managed to restore partial functionality to the auxiliary system. Power flickered back to life in sectors across the station, and the immediate crisis began to subside. As emergency teams moved to secure affected areas, Tessa slumped against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Chiron sat beside her, his tall frame folding gracefully into the confined space. "You saved thousands of lives today." "We both did," she corrected him. "I couldn't have repaired this without your tool." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the station returning to life. Finally, Tessa voiced the question that had been building in her mind. "What happens now, with Zendril, with your delegation, with us?" Chiron's expression grew solemn. "Zendril will return to Aurelia and attempt to spin events to his advantage. He will likely claim that his departure was to seek help, not to escape consequences." "And will he succeed?" "Perhaps in the short term, but his actions have consequences beyond political maneuvering." Chiron turned to face her fully. "As for the delegation, they will complete their diplomatic mission here and then return home to report on the success of our new trade agreement." Tessa nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. "And then you'll go with them." Instead of answering directly, Chiron reached out, his iridescent fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I came to this station with clear expectations of my duty," he said softly. "I was to observe, participate in negotiations, and return to Aurelia to fulfill my obligations to my house." "Which includes choosing a consort," Tessa added, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Yes," he acknowledged, "but what I found here, what I found in you, was something I never expected." Tessa met his gaze, searching those alien eyes for meaning. "And what was that?" "A kindred spirit," Chiron said simply. "Someone who sees beyond the surface, who values function over form, innovation over tradition. Someone who understands that true advancement comes not from isolation but from exchange, of ideas, of technologies, of cultures." He took her hand, the contrast between his shimmering skin and her work-roughened fingers stark yet somehow harmonious. "My father sent me here expecting I would finally see the inferiority of other species and embrace my duty to maintain Aurelian purity. Instead, I found the opposite truth." "So what will you do?" Tessa asked, barely breathing. Before he could answer, her communicator chirped with an urgent message from Director Patel. "Chief Williams, we need you in the main conference room immediately. The Aurelian High Council is demanding a direct communication regarding today's incident." They arrived at the conference room to find it filled with tense officials from both the station and the Aurelian delegation. On the massive communication screen, the stern face of an elder Aurelian dominated the room, Emperor Thaxion himself, Chiron's father. "My son," the Emperor acknowledged, his tone measured but cold. "I am informed there has been an incident." Chiron stepped forward. "Father, Lord Zendril has committed an act of sabotage against this station, endangering thousands of lives, including those of our own delegation. The Emperor's expression didn't change. Serious accusations. Lord Zendral reports differently. He claims the station's primitive systems failed and he departed to seek assistance. He lies, Chiron stated firmly, and I can prove it. To Tessa's surprise, Chiron activated a small device from his wrist guard, projecting a three-dimensional recording that clearly showed Zendral tampering with the station's systems shortly before the power failure. My security detail maintained surveillance as is protocol, Chiron explained. Zendral was not aware of this. The Emperor's composure faltered slightly at the evidence. This is disturbing. The third house has much to answer for. His gaze shifted, landing on Tessa with sudden intensity. And this is the human I've heard about, the engineer. Tessa straightened, meeting the alien ruler's scrutiny with professional dignity. Chief Engineer Tessa Williams, Your Imperial Majesty. She saved this station, Chiron added, a note of pride in his voice. Her innovations and quick thinking prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. The Emperor studied her for a long moment before speaking again. The Council will need time to discuss these developments. Prince Chiron, you will return to Oralia immediately to provide your testimony regarding Lord Zendral's actions. Chiron stepped forward. Father, before I return, there is something I must address officially. He turned to face the entire room, his bearing regal and determined. In accordance with the traditions of the seventh house, I am formally announcing my choice of consort. A ripple of surprise moved through the Aurelian delegation. The Emperor's expression darkened. Son, this is hardly the appropriate time or venue for such an announcement. On the contrary, Chiron countered respectfully but firmly, our traditions state that the declaration must be made in the presence of witnesses from both the house and those external to it. These circumstances satisfy that requirement perfectly. Before anyone could protest further, Chiron turned to Tessa, taking her hand in a formal gesture that clearly held ceremonial significance. I choose Engineer Tessa Williams of Earth, whose brilliance, courage, and vision represent the qualities our civilization has forgotten in its isolation. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Emperor's image seemed to grow larger on the screen, his voice thunderous. This is unprecedented. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 50 generations. And has grown weaker for it, Chiron replied calmly. Our technological advancement has plateaued. Our cultural evolution has stagnated. We need new perspectives, new ideas, new blood, Father. Tessa stood frozen, caught between astonishment at Chiron's declaration and the growing realization that she had just become the center of an interstellar diplomatic incident. Engineer Williams, the Emperor addressed her directly, his tone inscrutable. Do you understand what my son proposes? What it would mean to leave your world behind to join a civilization so different from your own? All eyes turned to her. In that moment, Tessa thought about her life on the station, the endless repairs, the ingenious solutions, the pride in keeping everything running against all odds. She thought about Earth, a planet she hadn't set foot on in years. And she thought about Chiron, who had seen beyond her grease-stained jumpsuit to recognize a mind that matched his own. With respect, Your Imperial Majesty, she replied, finding her voice, I understand adaptation better than most. It's what engineers do. We solve problems, we bridge incompatible systems, we find ways to make things work that shouldn't. She looked up at Chiron, a smile tugging at her lips. And sometimes the most unlikely connections prove to be the strongest. The Emperor's expression remained stern, but something shifted in his eyes, a reluctant recognition, perhaps even a glimmer of respect. Very well, he said finally. Prince Chiron, you and your chosen consort will return to Oralia. The Council will consider this matter in full accordance with our laws and traditions. The screen went dark without further ceremony. For a moment the room remained silent. Then Director Patel cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, Chief Williams, it seems you've been promoted from station engineer to alien royalty. That's certainly a first for Celestial Station's personnel records. A nervous laughter broke the tension, and the room gradually emptied as officials dispersed to manage the aftermath of the day's events. Soon, only Tessa and Chiron remained. I should have consulted you first, Chiron said, finally breaking the silence between them. It was presumptuous of me to make such a declaration without your prior agreement. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Extremely presumptuous, royal privilege at its finest. I can withdraw the announcement, he offered seriously. There would be diplomatic repercussions, but nothing compared to the impropriety of forcing such a decision upon you. She stepped closer to him, looking up into those sapphire eyes that had captivated her from their first meeting. Is it true what you said, about your civilization needing new perspectives? Absolutely, Chiron nodded, but that's not why I chose you. Then why did you? His expression softened. Because in all my travels across 12 star systems, you are the first person who looked at me and saw neither a prince to be flattered nor an alien to be feared, but simply someone to explain a power conduit to. Tessa laughed at the unexpected answer. That's a pretty low bar for choosing a life partner. On the contrary, Chiron replied, taking her hand again. It's perhaps the highest standard of all, to be seen for who you are, not what you represent. Outside the viewport, the stars shone brilliantly against the void, countless worlds spinning in their ancient patterns. But for Tessa Williams, chief engineer of Celestial Station, the universe had suddenly expanded beyond anything she had previously imagined. So, she said with a smile that held both apprehension and excitement, when do we leave for Oralia? I should probably pack my tools. The royal palace may never be the same, Chiron replied, returning her smile. Good, Tessa said firmly. It could probably use some human innovation. As they stood together, human and alien joined by understanding that transcended their differences. The distant stars seemed to burn a little brighter, witnesses to a connection that would bridge not just two people, but two civilizations. In the repair bay, Jasper the robotic assistant methodically organized Tessa's tools, unaware that its programming would soon need a significant update. How to serve a chief engineer who had become alien royalty. The cosmos, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all.